what are some of the factors that might restrain the effectiveness of your remediation efforts? Stick around to find out.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to, another episode of the CySA Plus Show. Dan, I have a question in my brain that I need to just get out here.
Okay.
What are some of the things that we have to worry about, things that might make our remediation efforts a little less successful?
That's a great question, because you'd think, we've done a vulnerability assessment, right? We've got the scan in hand. Here's all the vulnerabilities. We've worked up some great mitigations and remediations, and we're going to just hit the ground running. We're going to save the world. Hold on. Wait a second. You can't just go do that. Well, why not? Which is a great question, obviously. But unfortunately, there are things, as Wes points out, that might hinder us, that might, tie our hands.
Put the handcuffs on us, right?
Put the handcuffs on us.
Yep.
And keep us from just getting that work done. And there are legitimate reasons. I know, I'm that kind of person. I love to get stuff done. But there are legitimate reasons. Let's start off with the fact that, you might be working with something like a legacy system. Now, you think, what's the big deal about legacy systems? Everybody's got one, right? I'm sure. Well, here's the thing. Depending on the system, it could have no longer be being supported by the vendor. I think of Microsoft just ended life on, was it Windows 7?
Windows 7, that was January 14th of 2020. And if you look, we're doing this Thursday-ish, right around the beginning of April. So that's not too far along.
I wonder how many people are still running Windows 7.
About 13%.
There you go. 13% of the market is still running a Windows 7. This is a legacy system.
Yep.
Right? I know for a fact that there are still NT4 boxes running around in the world that are running very important systems, and it would probably make you have heart palpitations if I told you what they were. So what do we do, right? Do I just run in there and, there are no remediations for some of these things. I can't update it. I can't patch it. I can't do anything to this thing because it's going to break it. Or just that risk exists and that's how it is. It's because it's no longer supported. There are no patches being given out. There are no updates coming from the vendor. Oh, well, what do we do now? You'd have to go into something else to try to remediate that, but you couldn't touch that system. So it could inhibit what you are trying to do as far as remediation. We got to keep that in the forefront of our thoughts, that if we do have those legacy systems running around in our organization, that even though we have discovered vulnerabilities associated with them, there might not be any remediations or mitigations that we can effectively apply to get rid of those vulnerabilities, right? So just think about that. Legacy systems is a big one that hopefully is something that you thought of as we got into this episode. But if you haven't, now you've been updated.
Dan, we, implement things like standardization. I say we, there's standards organization bodies out there that are a lot more smarter than I am. And one of the things that we do for standardization is to promote that interoperability between dissimilar systems. However, when those aren't standardized, sometimes it's something that a company is going to hold on to. Where can things like proprietary systems maybe put a little bit of a hiccup in our remediation effort?
Yeah, they can definitely put a little hitch in your giddy up when it comes to that mitigations because of the proprietary nature, right? These are systems that are probably baked in-house. They may be just a very small market shared third-party system, but a lot of times this is just stuff that you've had your dev group. Hey, can you develop a system that does X, Y, or Z? We do that here. We have a couple of homegrown applications. The problem with proprietary systems is that they're proprietary, right? So if we find a vulnerability that's associated with one of those proprietary systems, the onus is on us to remediate it. So it's not like you can just go, hey, just apply a patch. Okay, here's the thing. That system will break if I do this to it. So I'm going to have to either do a complete refactor, or it could take a lot of time and effort, resources of the team. And typically these are limited in our purview because I don't know about you guys. I don't have endless money. It'd be nice to be one of the bigger organizations out in the world, the Microsofts, the Googles, that can just go hire 20 people and make that happen. that'd be great. But not everybody has that bandwidth. So if that be the case, you're going to be limited in your ability to remediate that, right? So it's inhibiting our ability. Hopefully you're seeing a theme here. I think of the need, or the idea of when I was looking at this as an objective, it came to my mind of COBOL programmers, right? COBOL programmers are in dire, the industry is in dire need for more COBOL programmers. But the problem is that's an old language. That's not something that most people are learning in these day and age. And you can jump to my screen here. I just brought up a quick Google search of COBOL skills gap, closing the COBOL programming skills gap, how legacy technology is creating the next skills gap, right? Kind of going back to the idea of legacy, right? COBOL is everywhere. Who will maintain it? The inevitable return of COBOL, because we're going to need that. We have proprietary stuff built in COBOL that we need help with. Jumped into this here real quick. It was one of those articles. The COBOL skills gap is an impending problem for the IBM Z community, but there are ways to combat this threat. And I looked up salaries and things like this. I'll put this article in the learner resources for you, but it kind of goes into just some of the information about how there are 240 billion lines of COBOL in operation. This is as of 10/25/19. Another 5 billion new lines are added each year. 3 trillion in commercial transactions are processed by COBOL, right? So if you have an application that your in-house COBOL programmers developed 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and now they're gone, either retired or otherwise, what do you do when you find a vulnerability in that system, right? So that would inhibit that. So understanding that those proprietary systems can cause us issues when it comes to remediation is something we need to be aware of.
I'll give you an example where this exact concept is hurting people right now, and that's in New Jersey. New Jersey's unemployment system is actually run by a 50-year-old mainframe that is runs on COBOL. So they are scrambling right now, given the pandemic that's going on. We're beginning of April here, to get those systems and maintain them. Those systems, they are scrambling for COBOL programmers as we speak. Now, you mentioned applying a patch, and then something happens. Now, I'm going to touch on a subject that I know that is very near and dear to a lot of our viewers' hearts, and by that I mean the disdain growing within, is Windows 10 updates, right? They have been a little shaky over the last year or so, maybe the last 2 years, and we've implemented a Windows 10 update, and now this in-house application we have or system is no longer working the way we expected. Dan, can you speak a little bit to things like degraded functionality?
Yeah, that's a real issue that we got to be aware of and worry about when it comes to trying to do some sort of mitigation. Because a lot of times when you've done a vulnerability assessment, you've found a vulnerability, the suggested mitigation many times is there's a patch for that. Install X patch. Great. But if I install X patch, it breaks something, right? I've dealt with this actually. Back when I was a systems admin and I did updates for a company. I did large scale patching. Every now and then, one of the not organization, with
silos.
Yeah, one of the silos in the company, typically in the shipping department or finance or something, would say, "Hey, our line of business app has stopped working." Oh, interesting. You go investigate it, and you call the company. "Hey, this isn't working." "Oh, did you apply last patch Tuesday's patch from Microsoft?" Yeah, it's breaking our system left and right." "Oh, okay. What do we got to do?" "You got to uninstall that patch." But there's a real problem security wise that patch takes away with, it mitigates that. Well, if you want that line of business application to work, you're going to need to remove that patch, right? So you've got this dilemma, and it's something you have to be aware of. Not only that, though, not just patches breaking things, just the fact that some mitigations will require you to perform a reboot. If that's a production server, can you do a reboot during the middle of the day? Can you do a reboot in the middle of the night? Sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not. Or if you do, it's going to cause a break in your business continuity. You're going to see some effect from that. So you have to be aware of that. Other things like, what if the mitigation is decommission the system? Can you? If I can't, what do I do, right? So again, inhibitors. Maybe I have to disable a feature. And that feature is critical for what we do. But if I don't disable the feature is what causes the vulnerability, and you see where I'm headed with this stuff. So working with degraded functionality or understanding that performing mitigations could result in degraded functionality is a real inhibitor to actually performing those mitigations.
Dan, one of the things I think of is that in any organization, like you've mentioned, there were many different silos that you were supporting. I think of it as a conveyor belt of workflows, right? And businesses have many different conveyor belts, many different types of workflows. And when you think of inhibitors, right, I think of think of a bottling company taking a wrench and throwing it right in the middle of the conveyor belt's engine, and hey, let's see what happens. Now, can you talk about things like business processes that could get interrupted? Because maybe I did apply that patch because I thought I was doing something I should be doing.
Yeah, and it may not be a patch. Maybe we did something like we removed one system because it was just the risk was too great. So we ended up having to go or create a new system. And now you're going to get pushback from the people that are engaged in working with those systems.
Like user acceptance can be one of the first things, right?
Exactly.
Sure.
People, and depending on who they are and whose ear they have a hold of, they could influence whether or not that mitigation strategy gets approved. So you have to be prepared for those interruptions in business processes. And to say, I'm going to build a solid case for why I think this is an important thing. And that's going to take you more time and more effort to build that case so that when you do present it to whomever it's going to impact in those processes, that you're going to get that buy-in. You're going to say, yeah, I know it's going to make life a little more difficult this way, but the reward is way better than the risk with doing away with that system and implementing the new system, or implementing this mitigation strategy, which, yes, will affect you, but ultimately it's for the greater good of the system in whole. Because if we're all out of jobs because there was a data breach, then you won't have to worry about that anymore, now will you? So that's probably one of your best arguments to go with is data breaches cost money, and this system is going to cause us one. That could be a real push to move that along inside of that sphere.
Dan, in our organizations, we can have a lot of different systems when it comes to, and again, I'm just thinking from a hardware perspective, applying patches, right? We have things like we have change management, configuration documentation that needs to happen. But there are some times where we need to run that up the flagpole because we need to make sure that we have some kind of organizational governance. Can you speak to that?
Oh, yeah. So organizational governance, right? Say it with me, everyone. Bureaucracy. Bureaucracy. It's a fun term, right? It's not so much fun to deal with that old red tape gun. And think of things like change management. Okay, I have my vulnerability assessment. I got my vulnerabilities. I got my mitigation strategy. I want to implement X, Y, and Z changes. Great. Make a change, right? Go through the formal change process and change management. So, okay, that means I've got to go to whatever application we use for change management, do the change request. The request has to be approved. And maybe I'm sitting on that approval side of things for a week, 2 weeks. You guys understand that this is a critical vulnerability and I need to, well, here's the thing, son. I'm the CIO of this here company. And you're just going to wait until I figure that this is a good thing to do. So those C-suite executives and the people that have power to affect change might not necessarily have that buy-in yet. Maybe they've got somebody in a business process somewhere going, don't let them do that. It's going to break everything. They're not so much worried about, because they don't understand the risk behind it. So again, you might go back to that whole making a case thing. But if you're in that change management process, you have to wait for the process to be completed before you're able to actually go in and apply those changes. And depending on the system that you have in place and the bureaucracy and red tape that surrounds it, that could take longer, than you would like it to. So again, that would stop us from swiftly and decisively coming down with those remediation strategies, and is also extremely frustrating because I've been down that world too. It's not a lot of fun. I think change management is a double-edged sword. It's really helpful and necessary to say, hey, here's where I asked to be able to do this and you approved it. So if it broke anything, that's on you, player. That ain't my fault. You said it was good. So it can be helpful, but it can also be a hindrance sometimes, especially when it comes to vulnerabilities.
I know we need documentation, and sometimes we have some kind of contractual obligation we need to apply to or adhere to as well. So can you tell me where things like contracts and agreements come into play?
Yeah, remember, we have made deals. We have struck an accord with certain entities, maybe with inside our own organization or maybe with third-party organizations. We would have these contracts and agreements laying around, and in them, may dictate certain things that would cause us to not be able to engage in certain mitigations. Again, inhibit that activity from occurring. So think of things like your MOU, which is a Memorandum of Understanding. Commonly, I've seen this as referred to as like a gentleman's agreement. It's the idea that let's do some exploratory work to see if this engagement of the two parties would be beneficial for both of us.
So not legally binding, maybe?
Yeah, typically it's not. So it's not intended to be legally binding.
Gotcha. Okay,
right?
gotcha. Not intended.
You get too wordy. You paint yourself in a corner, and you could possibly create that. And if that's in there, yes, all of a sudden you've caused a problem.
Yep.
So be very careful in those MOUs to not create some sort of contract, but that it is that MOU and not moving into something like an SLA, a service level agreement, where you have contractually said, I will deliver this level of service without fail for this amount of time, blah, blah, blah. We see these things like cloud. So when I make a contract with a cloud service provider, they say they will give me uptime of 4 nines or 5 nines, and I pay X amount of dollars for that service. Now, if they do a vulnerability assessment of their systems, and one of the mitigations is that they drop service for me for longer than the SLA allows for, well, now I've got recourse to go after them. Hey, you promised me X. So how do you deal with that? Well, there are ways to do it, but what we're looking at today and what we're focusing on is the fact that it will slow the process down, because now, we hold on, Billy. Don't apply that patch yet, because it's going to cause a reboot, and this system takes like an hour to reboot because it's whatever, right? There's real problem. We have to spin up all these different services. It has to be done manually, yada, yada, yada. It's a real process, and that will break an SLA that we have with a vendor or a client. So you have to think about those contracts and those agreements that you've made, even if they are just a handshake type of agreement. You want to be as true to those agreements as you possibly can, and maybe just get with those third parties or those second parties and say, hey, we found some vulnerabilities and we want to continue to have a good working relationship with you. I know this goes against our MOU, but if we could take those systems down or do this or do that, that would be great. Maybe they'll be for it, maybe they won't, but that's very situational. It's very constrained to your specific situation. So there we go. I'm making sure I didn't miss anything. I think that covers it. SLAs could impact internal users, external users alike, and third parties. Keep that in mind. Access to systems and that level of service is really what we're looking at with those contractual agreements. So there you go, Wes. There's a lot of things that can inhibit our remediations and our mitigation strategies, but if we're aware of them, maybe we can have a more, a very specific, better time frames to set forth and be more realistic.
Sure. So when it comes to the compound of successful remediation, remember there are a lot of rocks that we can throw that can have a rippling effect and affect your ability to perform that successfully. Things like legacy systems. Remember proprietary systems, all of them bundling. You can't see anything. We're not going to allow you to see things. Degraded functionality, business process interruption, organizational government. And then remember, you might have contractual agreements, if I could say that, to consider as well. And while considering all that, we've got a lot more to talk about in CySA Plus, but not in this episode, so we hope to see you in the upcoming episodes.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.